Hello, my friend. A very happy Sunday, January 12th, 2025 to you and to yours. I pray that this finds you well from wherever and whenever it is that you are tuning in. So yesterday I came in with a message titled, Just Say One Word. And the inspiration was the story of the Roman centurion who came to Jesus because he wanted Jesus to heal his sick servant. And when Jesus offered to go into his home, the centurion said, "You don't even need to come into my home. Just say one word and my servant will be healed." And the whole idea of yesterday's post was that it often does not take much for a transformation in our lives. We are typically one word away, one experience away, one encounter away, one revelation away, one experience away, one connection away, right? One strike away. Or if I can use the analogy of Derby, who was 3 feet away from goal, sometimes we're just 1 foot away from striking gold. And in that presentation, I said, well, how do you get to your one word, your one thing that brings about transformation? And the conclusion was that it's only in being faithful and consistent with what you know to do and what has been revealed to you that we somehow bump into our one word. In other words, when we are faithful and consistent, we move not only towards our breakthrough, but we also attract our breakthrough towards ourselves. Well, all that to say that the message today is following up on that. We talked about one word, and today I want to talk to you about one thing. One thing. So, and the question here for you is, what is that one thing in your life that you can focus on that can transform the rest of your life? What's the one thing in your life that you can focus on that has the potential of transforming all of your life? So allow me to give you another story also in the Bible. This is a story of Jesus when he visited his friends Mary and Martha. It's found in the book of Luke chapter 10, and I'm going to read from verses 38 to 42. And here's how the story goes. Verses 38. Now it came to pass, as they went, that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and listened or heard his word. But Martha, by the way, I'm reading from the King James Versioneth, in case these words sound discombobulating. Verses 40, but Martha was cumbered about much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not, you gotta love the King James, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. In other words, she was saying, Jesus, don't you realize I'm here laboring to make this bash a success, and Mary is just sitting at your feet listening to you. Tell her to come to help me. And verses 41, and Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things. And here it is, verses 42, but one thing is needful. And Mary hath chosen that good part, that one thing, which shall not be taken away from her. In other words, Jesus was saying, everything that you're doing is great, preparing for the bash and cooking, and it's necessary and important. But there's one thing that's more important than preparing for the bash, spending time and connecting with me. And Mary has chosen that. Paul continues to kind of extrapolate on this idea in a verse that is found in 1 Corinthians 10:23. And here Paul is talking to the Roman church, telling them to exercise the freedom that they have in Christ responsibly. Here's what 1 Corinthians 10:23 says, everything is permissible for me, but not all things are beneficial. Another version puts it this way: all things are lawful, they are okay to do, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. In other words, in an abundance of things, it's incumbent upon you and me to find the things that are edifying, the things that are profitable, or in the words of Jesus, the thing that is needful. Now, in the world of self-development and psychology and science, there's a great book that actually captures this idea, and it's called The One Thing, written by Gary Keller of Keller Williams Realty. If you live in the US, that's a name you should recognize. And he co-authored it with Jay Papasan. Papasan reminds me of a reggae dancehall guy back in my... By the way, he became a Christian. Papasan, look him up. He has amazing music. Anyway, the overview of the book essentially says that an abundance of tasks in our lives does not always give us success, and that it's in prioritizing and focusing on the most important tasks that we gain momentum that leads to success. And in this book, Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, they say the way to figure out what your one thing is to ask this question: what is the one thing that I can do such that in doing that one thing, it makes everything else easier or unnecessary? What is the one thing that I can do such that in doing it, it makes everything else easier or unnecessary completely? A similar idea is expressed in the Pareto principle, which you have probably heard. The Pareto principle is also known as the 80-20 rule, and it states that roughly 80% of the results or outcomes come from approximately 20% of the causes or inputs, meaning that a small percentage of factors contribute to a large majority of the effects. Essentially, it highlights the idea of focusing on the vital few, the 20% that are giving you the 80%, and giving less attention to the 80% that's only producing 20%. Now, in my time of listening to Myron Golden, he introduced me to another law that speaks of the same idea, and this one is called Price's Law. And Price's Law states that half of the productivity or the output of a domain is produced by the square root of a domain. I'll say that again. Half of the productivity or output of any domain is produced by the square root of that domain. And Myron always likes to give this example. If you have 4 tomato plants, the square root of 4 is 2. 2 tomato plants are responsible for producing 50% of the production of that domain. Well, that makes sense because 2 is half of 4. It makes sense that 50% of 4, which is 2, which is also the square root of 4, is producing 50% of the productivity. But the higher the number goes. So in a domain of 100 tomato plants, 10 of those plants are responsible for producing 50% of the total production. Make it 10,000. In a domain of 10,000 plants, only 100 100 are responsible for producing 50% of all the 10,000 plants. And Myron makes the point that what is true in ecology is true in economics, right? But anyway, the whole point here, and now the question maybe that I want to pose to you at this point is, according to the Pareto principle, what are the 20% in your life that are responsible for giving you 80% of your outcomes? Or if I could ask you, Price's Law, the question based on Price Law, what is the square root in any domain of your life that is producing 50% of the output in that domain? In the words of Gary Keller, what is the one thing in your life that you could do such that in doing it, everything else will become easier or unnecessary? Or in the words of Jesus, in your life, there are many tasks that maybe you might be encumbered with, if I can use the King James version. But what is the one thing that is needful? Now, you might be like, okay, Evans, all that sounds good, but kind of give me a little bit more context, some meat and bones to work with. Well, let's look at some areas in your life. Let's start maybe with your personal life. In 2025, what's one mindset that you can shift that will give you the breakthrough that you're looking for? What is one skill set that you can acquire, or maybe it's a skill set that you already have that you can grow, that will give you the biggest return on investment? Now, what is the one asset you could deploy? And, it's James Malinchak who I was listening to, and he said that in life you need to succeed, you need the right mindset, you need the right skill set, but you also need the right asset. Get off your behind and do something. So what's the one asset? And let's look at asset in the context of you getting off your behind and doing something. What's the one action? Let's look at the productivity in your life in terms of your activities. And I like to make the distinction between our life are made up of two kinds of activities: life-maintaining activities and goal-advancing activities. Life-maintaining activities, showering, cooking, eating, they maintain your life. Well, you could argue eating is giving you strength to advance to your goals. But we tend to spend a lot of times on life-maintaining activities, and we fail to identify and focus on goal-advancing activities. In other words, activities that move us towards our dream, towards our vision, towards our end goals. Talking of assets, one of our greatest assets is time. Actually, Myron Golden makes the point that time is not money. Time is more infinitely valuable than money, because you can always make more money, but you cannot make more time. How can you leverage your asset of time? In other words, to which one activity that's your 20% that brings about an 80% return on your investment, to which activity do you need to focus the most time? And talking about time, what time of day is the most productive for you? Is your energy level the highest? And to which you should assign the most important activities of the day that you're giving the most time, if that even makes sense. Another asset is our health. Somebody said your health is your wealth. What is one thing that you can do, of the many things that you can do this year to improve your health, to lose that extra 5-10 pounds that you promised yourself as a New Year resolution you will? Of the plethora of activities and things you could do, what's the thing that will give you the biggest bang for your buck? Maybe it's a food that you can add into your life or eliminate from your life. Maybe it's an exercise. Of all the exercises you can do, what's the one exercise that gives you the biggest bang for your buck? Maybe it's adding some more rest. Okay, that's in your personal life. Let's look at our relationships. Number one, all relationships are not created equal. Some are more equal than others. Which are the relationships that you need to give your most intention and attention? And within those relationships, what is the one activity or the one thing that you can do that can take those relationships or that relationship to the next level? Of the plethora of activities, of the buffet of activities and strategies, what is the one that will give you the biggest bang? When you're thinking of relationships, maybe that's in your personal relationship. Maybe that's in your professional relationship. In my business, believe it or not, 20% of my clients provide 80% of my income. That principle works. And so if I am smart, I will not neglect any client, but it might be wise of me to give extra attention and care to the 20% of clients that provide 80% of my revenue. Does that make sense? So even in your professional world, this applies, right? Who is the one mentor or coach, whether it's in your personal life or professional life, we're still in relationships, right, that could come and transform your life this year? Of the plethora of coaches out there, right? Okay, we've looked at our personal life, mindset, skill set, our assets in terms of our productivity, our time, our health, then relationships. Which relationship are most important? What's the most important aspect within those relationships that gives you the biggest return? Now let's talk about money, finances. of all your income producing activities, what's the 20%? What's the one activity that gives you the most? What's the square root of that domain that gives you the most return, and where you could focus more activities, or you could focus more intention and attention, right? In your expenditures, what's the one expenditure maybe you could add or cut off that will give you the biggest bang? In investments, of all the investments that you could make this year, what is the one that has the chance of giving you the highest ROI? So, my friends, I think you get the point. In conclusion, maybe if I can borrow the words from yesterday's post, we only are one word away from our transformation. But I want to suggest to you that we find our transformation in the context of being faithful and consistent in the one thing, or in the one things that are the most important in our lives. So as we finish, let me just kind of take this a step even further, and which blows away my mind. In the book The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, they talk about taking the Pareto principle to the infinity. What does that mean? What that means is that, remember that Pareto principle says that 80% of a domain, I guess if I can use that language, is responsible for 20% of the output in the domain. And conversely, 20% of a domain is responsible for 80%. Now, do you understand that of the 20% that is responsible for 80%, it's only 20% of that 20% that's responsible for 80% of the total 80% of the original production. I hope I didn't lose you. So 20% is producing 80%, right? That 20%, or let's call it 20 people in an organization, are producing 80% of the results in that organization. Of those 20 people, 20%, so what's 20% of 20? 4 people are producing 80% of the original 80%. And of those 4 people, I guess 20% are producing. So in other words, you can take the Pareto principle all the way down to infinity. Same thing with Price's law. Yeah, if in an organization of 10,000 people, 100 are responsible, the square root, right? The square root, the productivity, the square root of a domain is responsible for 50% of the production in that domain. So the square root of 10,000 people in an organization is 100 people. They are responsible for 50% of the production in that organization, but it's 10%, it's the square root of those 100 that further is responsible for 50%. In other words, 10 people are responsible for 50% of the 50% of the whole, and you can continue working that all the way down. And Gary Keller and Jay Papasan in their book, they make the same argument. What is the one thing in your life, right? And then in that one thing, what is the one thing within that one thing that will give you the greatest return on investment? And in that one thing of the one thing, what is the one thing of that one thing of that one thing? It gets crazy. But the point is, boil it all the way down. In other words, if you spend some time to really think about, you will nail it down. You will break down anything to its most core and essential elements. I hope all of that makes sense. So, what's that one thing? And how can you make that one thing a habit in your life? I told you of a great book, The One Thing by Gary Keller. Another great book is Atomic Habits by James Clear. It shows you and I how to form habits that help us. And why are habits important? Because we choose our habits, but habits, we may choose our habits, but habits make our character, which in terms make our destiny. Another great book is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. And in The Compound Effect, Darren Hardy says that success is about doing the small right things consistently over time. The small right things. What are the right things? The one thing that you can do such that in doing it makes everything else either easier or unnecessary. The right things, the small right things to do consistently over time, it's the 20% that's responsible for 80% of your return on investment. It's the square root of your domain that is responsible for 50% of the production in your domain. As we part ways, find your one thing. I think all I'm trying to say is find your one thing, do it faithfully and consistently. And therein, my friend, is the secret, if there is such a thing as to success. If it's not a secret, maybe I'd like to suggest that it's your fastest straight line, it's your shortest distance and your fastest path between where you are and where it is that you want to be, to between what you are doing and what it is that you want to do, and between what you have and what it is that you want to have. May the Lord God bless you and keep you. Until next time, bye-bye.